Strata is a company in the identity orchestration space, and we're solving the problems for the multi-cloud enterprise that have their applications and identity running in a lot of different places, and they need to find a way to bring it all together and make it work in a cohesive way. And we're here at RSA because this is where our customers are, and companies that are looking to adopt and modernize their identity infrastructure, RSA is the place to be. So identity orchestration, the way it works, you can think about it as a layer on top of all the other identity systems that you run. Identity orchestration is not an identity provider. Instead, we make multiple identity systems work together. So if you use Okta and Microsoft, then we allow it to coexist and work together. So you can use one for instance, your workforce, and the other for your customers. So the way that it's different is that what it's doing in the end is really finding the integration, solving the integration problem between how applications consume identity. And in the past, that meant typically you'd have to write custom code, but with identity orchestration, you can handle the integration without changing any of the applications. So that allows people to do more with what they have and to, especially today, move more of their applications and their workloads to the cloud, but do it in a secure way where they still have control. One of the things that we're seeing a lot of is the rise of every company becoming a software company. And we saw this a lot where even some of our customers are in the grocery space. They become grocery delivery companies, and all of a sudden they're thinking about the world the way that a software company does, or like a .com company did in the past. So as these companies that often come from the old school where they're trying to lead and innovate and keep up with the dynamics of the marketplace, they turn more and more to applications, and software is the differentiator. So when you deal with that kind of world, you've got a lot of concerns around security, and identity is front and center in that, because the identity is the way that you manage relationship with your customers, for instance, digitally, or you manage your relationship with your workforce. They may be working remote. So a lot of the dynamics that we're seeing in the marketplace is how do you take the digital transformation as an opportunity instead of just moving your workload from one data center to a cloud data center, using this transformation as an opportunity to make it better. So for instance, move your application and upgrade your identity so you move away from passwords like you've been using for the last 10 plus years, and instead use something like your mobile and have passwordless authentication that's replacing the vulnerable password-based authentication with something more secure and convenient. So when people go to these digital transformations, it's about getting more secure, more convenient, and that's really how we're seeing people differentiate in the market. User experience has become a huge differentiator with the way that you interact with your customers online. Customers want to have the convenience of, I don't want to remember another password, I just want to have access to my banking information or my healthcare information. So when you try and bring security into that world, you really have to think about making it not only secure, but easy to use. And the way we're finding people do that is on that registration up front, where you're onboarding someone and you say, hey, you want to create a new account? Say you're in financial services, you're creating a new account, well, you need to validate that this user is who they say they are to comply with anti-money laundering regulations, for instance. So there could be a number of different identity proofing steps that you go through, where in the old days it was like very chunky, where you'd have custom code that would start here and then take you there. The experience was very different from one provider to the next. And what we're seeing people do is use identity orchestration to create a seamless experience where the look and feel of everything is consistent, but you're still able to use all of those identity proofing steps so that you can comply with the anti-money laundering, know your customer kind of requirements but not compromise on the user experience. So you're both convenient and compliant and secure. What we're seeing right now in modernization, some of the biggest challenges is the amount of work involved, the custom coding that has to be done every time you want to modernize an application. Typically, we see that takes about 6 months of custom code, and it's pretty expensive, about $150,000 per application. So if you're at scale and you're an enterprise, you have hundreds or thousands of applications, your big barrier is the amount of work involved to bring your applications to the cloud. So one big way to address that is to use software instead of custom code, and that's what Identity Orchestration is helping a lot of companies take a process that may have taken 6 months, reduce it down to minutes, like 10 minutes in many cases. So getting around that skill shortage is another aspect that we see people struggle with, because it's really hard to hire people who understand identity, who understand the infrastructure, and being able to do that with software instead of personnel is a real easy way to modernize without having to do all of that manual effort. Identity plays a real central role in mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures. Because when you think about what is a company, it's a composite of its employees and its customers, all the identities. And so when you have a situation where you're trying to either bring two organizations together or take one organization and split it apart, a lot of this comes to the identity component. And a lot of times in the case of an acquisition, you may have one company that the original company is a Microsoft shop, and then they acquire a company that uses Okta. Now all of a sudden you've got Microsoft and Okta need to coexist. And so that's where orchestration kind of makes those work in a coexistence kind of model. So that is a really helpful way to bring different systems together. When you're talking about a divestiture, for instance, you may have a number of applications that are going to move with the company that's leaving. And today, those applications sit right next to the other applications that are staying. And all of the users and the workforce or the customers are all tied into those applications. So with a divestiture, you need to think about how you're going to move your applications into another environment. So lift and shift, but at the same time, move and improve your identity so that you can upgrade and not have to carry forward the legacy. So divestiture, moving your applications, pulling apart your identity structure, and making them work in a quick way, because most acquisitions or divestitures have pretty tight time frames. And so you can't have the luxury of saying, oh, we'll just do this over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, because once the longer that deal's not complete, the more risk there is to the transaction not working. So people are really focused on being able to do these things very quickly. And so that's another case where people just don't have time to do the manual work. You need to have software that will do it very quickly so that you can meet your strict timelines to meet your transaction requirements. So a lot of this has to do with migrating user accounts. And a couple things to keep in mind when you're doing that. One is that you don't want to disrupt the user experience, because we've been training our employees and our customers that if the login page changes, that is likely a phishing attack or something where we've been telling them, hey, that's a bad thing. So if you introduce a new experience on the login, that's going to cause confusion and it becomes really difficult. So what we find is really effective is to keep that experience the way that it is, but under the covers, behind the scenes, swap the identity systems out so that when a user who needs to migrate to a modern system, what we'll do is use orchestration to, when they log in, check their authentication against the existing system, and then simultaneously create an account in a new system so that when they come back in the future, they get authenticated against the cloud system, not on the legacy system. So doing that in a really seamless, transparent way is a good way to make these migrations happen. Instead of doing it all at once, you do it as it happens in more of a incremental, real-time way. So the pandemic was unexpected, and it had a big impact on a lot of companies. From a customer standpoint, what we found is that more and more people were working remote, which meant they were working from home, meaning they weren't on a company network. And so when you think about people accessing an application, working on a Wi-Fi hotspot, at their home, at a Starbucks, what have you, now you're not sitting behind the perimeter. And so the expression that identity has become the new perimeter is a big part of what is behind this remote work revolution. So in order to succeed in that world, you need to really understand how your identities work. Think about your zero trust, continual access, continual authentication, least privilege, and how do you make all of that stuff work together? Identity orchestration ties all of the different authentication, the identity providers, and connects it to the applications so that you can have your zero trust access from your remote workforce, whether it's on a Wi-Fi network or working from home. It's really easy to get access to the applications no matter where you are, but have it secured the entire time.